I'm gonna be completely honest for a second. I think that most narrative games can be boring and really drawn out. Now that's not to say I don't like all narrative games. In fact, there are a lot of amazing and iconic gems in the indie scene, such as Outer Wilds and Firewatch. I'm more talking about narrative games like Life is Strange, which I know about half of you watching right now want to kill me, but let me explain. In those games, they're less of a game at that point and more of a movie or a glorified walking simulator. You'll have some really good story and exposition, but it takes going through about 10 cutscenes before getting to a few gameplay segments. And so coming from my experience, it takes a special game for me to get truly immersed. And that special game for me would be the Beginner's Guide, which is quite an old game made all the way back in 2015. So for any of the new gens watching, that means that this game existed before Fortnite.
Stream sniping.
The game was created by Davey Wreden, best known as the creator of the Stanley Parable. Now, if you heard anything about the Stanley Parable, you'll know that it's one of the most iconic games that come out during the 2010s. It was an exploration, choice-driven game that you would see Markiplier play on the family computer in the living room.
Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier.
Oh, you silly coward.
In 2011, the game initially started out as a Half-Life 2 mod, but Davey collaborated with William Pugh to create the standalone version in 2013 under their joint company, Galactic Cafe. I mention this because when Davey created the Beginner's Guide, it was developed by Everything Unlimited, the independent studio later made by Davey after he disbanded with William. What I want to make immediately apparent is that both of these games are heavily related despite both stories seeming to have nothing in common. The truth is that they both tackle the topics of game development and artistic struggle, and on a much deeper level, mental health. That's the reason I bring up the Stanley Parable in the first place. It's crucial in setting up the context for why David created the Beginner's Guide 4 years later, giving a glimpse into his creative journey and mental health at that time. Once you boot up the game, you're met with some opening text. The Beginner's Guide is a narrative video game from Davey Wreden, the creator of the Stanley Parable. It lasts about an hour and a half and has no traditional mechanics, no goals or objectives. Instead, it tells a story of a person struggling to deal with something they do not understand. Davey Wreden begins by explaining how he met his friend Coda, a fellow game developer, and how Coda's work greatly encouraged and inspired him to make his own games. Davey thought it'd be a good idea to make a game publicly honoring Coda's abandoned work, allowing players to observe his creative journey that went from 2008 to 2011. The first level of Coda's that you load into is a simple game modeled to be like a CSGO map. Davey explains that while it's nothing special, it still shows Coda learning the basics of game development and constructing a 3D environment. Walking around the map, you'll notice that there are floating boxes, untextured walls, and unfinished terrain, which seem like Coda didn't get around to fixing, but Davey explains why they're there.
It's like a reminder that this video game was constructed by a real person. And it kind of makes you wonder, what was going through his head as he was building this? This is what I like about all of Coda's games. I mean, not that they're all fascinating as games, but that they are all going to give us access to their creator.
This is what Davey wants to hit at in his conglomeration of Coda's work, that behind these games is a real person, and that these games allow you to see who Coda really is. In addition, Davey goes on further to say that Coda thought of himself as a quiet recluse, and tended to frequently make games only to abandon them. Although Coda started creating games in 2008, he suddenly stopped putting out any games around 2011 for unknown reasons. Davey then says that alongside giving Coda's games a pedestal to stand on, he also hopes that this game might reach him and inspire him to get back into game development.
And that's why I've taken this opportunity to gather all of his work together, is because I find his games powerful and interesting, and I'd like this collection to reach him, to maybe encourage him to start creating again.
At the end of the CSGO level, Davey leaves an email to reach him if players have a different interpretation or things they thought were interesting. Now I was checking to see if other people had emailed Davey and see if the email was actually legit. Apparently it is, he'll just respond with a different email. And while that little tidbit of information seems weird to bring up right now, it will make sense later in the video.
Warning. Is the machine active?
The story behind it is that the ship's engine is going haywire and that it has to be turned off or everyone will die. Davey notes the game being more generic compared to his later work as you walk down various hallways until you get to a big empty room. Here Davey points out the seemingly abandoned game and its incomplete features, such as there being no enemies, the gun not being able to reload, or the unfinished skybox.
But ultimately we don't really know. Maybe Coda thought that actually it was complete the way that it is. And I think that we should talk about his games for what they are, rather than for what they're not.
A nearby door proceeds to open where more hallways lead you to an oddly placed labyrinth that lays between you and the Whisper Machine. Wanting to continue the game's narrative, Davey makes a decision to skip you past the labyrinth, seeing no point in it. Here you enter the engine room and hear a female voice speak to you over the intercom.
Hey, you there, in the engine room. You could save us all. That being is powering the Whisper Machine. We could disrupt it by introducing a great enough heat signature. If your body could stop the beam. It's so much to ask, but for all of our lives, would you do it?
Also, a little side note, but besides this and a few other points in the game, this is the only time where that female voice is heard, which could be simply one of Coda's friends or part of a game theory I'm going to talk about later on. Now, initially when Coda was developing this level, he intended for the Whisper Machine to kill you instantly. However, Coda finds a bug that doesn't result in the player dying, but instead levitating, even to the point of clipping outside of the map bounds.
The beam causes you to start floating. And this is an important moment for him. Because yes, this is technically a glitch, but Coda identifies something human about it, like how small it makes you feel in the face of this larger chaotic system. Or this floating could be the afterlife, a peaceful place, juxtaposed against all of the hysteria that you've just had to traverse. I don't even know. I have no idea what he was thinking, but what's clear is that after making this, something lodges itself in his brain.
Davey also goes on to add that what catches Coda's interest is the weird and experimental parts of game design, and so it's through these bugs that Coda's levels become much more unique, ultimately giving the player a much more interesting experience. With you quickly finding out that you can only move backwards, you'll see that this level has various bits of text on the walls, with the first bit of a sentence saying the past was behind her. After walking a few steps backwards, you'll hit a wall that definitely wasn't there before, completing the sentence fragment we just saw with the text reading, but the future could not be seen. I want to take a minute to point out how even the music in this level is reversed.
It is less advanced than the previous game, but actually it seems to be more focused, more complete. Coda's trying to give it a unique voice rather than simply basing it on a pre-existing trope.
A bit further into the game, the walls continue to change and hallways also appear, with questions and text fragments appearing like, why does the future change? And when she stops and looks, it becomes clearer. In front of this text, you see a very strange staircase with sentence fragments appearing on the walls as you walk up them. The full sentence reads, but if the future was always behind her, how will she find the strength to confront it? I find it interesting that Davey doesn't comment on the level's main theme or idea, but later on in the video, I believe that this has very important connotations about him. Here we can gauge one of the many ideas the level might be communicating. It might be the character lingering on trauma or past bad experiences, trying to move on from the past. Despite what I think, we still don't know Coda's intended meaning that he had for this level. The next level is basically a quick transitional segment between games where you pass a sign that reads, now entering. While it doesn't seem like much, Davey assures the player that this will make sense after the next level. Davey comments on how the Coda would often put bizarre titles in his games, with Davey regretting that he didn't spend more time with him to figure out why. In front of you, you'll notice 3 gray towers and a very long staircase that allows you to access one of the towers. An interesting thing I noticed was that if you want to walk behind the tower with the stairs, Davey will initially tell you that there's nothing over there.
I know it's tempting, but there's actually nothing over here. Sorry.
If you stick around the right corner of the map, an MP4 titled Sex Worker Emitter will play. If you turn left and go to the opposite corner, an MP4 called Emitter Scary Loop will also play. But I searched around for any possible hints on why these sound bites are in the game, and from my understanding, there's nothing really special. I'm curious why it was left in the game, as Davey has dialogue if players want to walk to these specific corners. At the very least, it plants the idea that Davey isn't a reliable narrator. Now as you climb up the stairs, a door at the top opens with your speed decreasing as you go up, eventually slowing you to a crawl. Davey asked that if Coda never planned to show these games to anyone, why would he code the door to open? Now you can choose to do this one of 2 ways. Either walk up legitimately, the way Coda intended to, or press the enter key using Davey's modification to get into the room quicker. This is one of the many modifications that you'll see Davey make in Coda's games, leading to a problem about an artist's intention versus audience interpretation. Entering the room, you'll see multiple bits of text accumulating across various parts of the room.
A room that's warm and nice and filled with little ideas for games. Coda would often tell me that he didn't mind if people thought of him as cold or distant. He said that he knew that he was actually a vibrant and compassionate person, but that it takes time to really see that. It can be a very slow climb to get there.
This is where you'll notice that Davey's and Coda's views on games start to conflict. For a lot of Coda's games, we don't know exactly what he was thinking when developing them, but with this level, it's clear that Coda partly intended to convey the idea of taking time to know people and gradually see who they really are. In contrast, Davey deliberately skips past the game's slow climb, erasing the intentional progress you have to make. We'll see him actually make this point a few levels later, but with that view from Coda shared by Davey, we now know just a little bit more about who Coda is. Before we're given too much time to reflect on that, we're thrown into the next game. When you spawn in, you'll immediately walk down various concrete hallways until you reach a drop-down point and you're unable to go back the way you came. However, in front of you is the first puzzle that Coda introduces into his games.
Well, this is new for Coda. It's an actual puzzle. Go ahead and see if you can solve it.
When you open the door, you're greeted with a black void that sits between another door. After some tinkering, you'll find that the lever to unlock the next door sits behind the first door after you close it. After successfully solving the puzzle, Davey tells you to remember the solution as you come across 3 dots on the wall next to you. While it seems just like a random texture, trust me, these 3 dots have a very important relation to Coda that I'll talk about later on. Walking a bit further, you'll encounter another drop-down point, but this time, you'll just find an empty room in front of you, with seemingly nowhere to go. Not soon after, Davey again modifies the level, allowing you to see a huge maze and abundance of stairs, showing that there's way more to this level than we were initially supposed to believe.
How about that? There was more to it than we had any way of knowing. I actually find it funny that this game comes after the Stairs game, since they essentially convey the opposite idea. So, in the Stairs game, a dull exterior concealed a rich interior. And then, in this level, a dull interior hides this fantastic outer world. Either way, I think that the point is the same, is that most of the time you don't get to know what you're missing, or even that you're missing anything. That's not your role as a player.
Immediately after the Stairs game, we're shown how Davey once again pushes his interpretation forward by modifying the game to show the player something they're not meant to see. To be clear, it's not bad that Davey is sharing his interpretation or him looking past the level to see if anything else is meant to add to the experience. In fact, Davey might be onto something about how you don't get to know what you're missing. This lines up with Coda's view on how it takes time to know who people really are. Rather, the issue is from Davey taking Coda's finished game and its uncertain intended meaning and twisting that into fitting his interpretation better. However, the question is raised that if your role as a player isn't to understand, then what actually is it? We're back to the same place seen in the entering level with a gravel path and wooden sign, but this time the sign reads, "Now exiting." Davey makes the point that the Stairs game and the puzzle game are interconnected, as shown by them being placed between the entering and exit levels. They act as a bridge to connect similar ideas in 2 different games. He argues that there's a bigger picture to be seen when all these games are put together. This level opens up in a white void with a cafe called the Streetwise Fool. Davey takes this moment to dive into game development and how specifically a game engine sets the limits to what you can and can't do when creating a game.
Every video game runs on what's called an engine, which determines what the game can and cannot do. So in other words, the engine is a set of tools for game development.
He goes on to say that a lot of the games in the beginner's guide are made through the Source engine, with the most famous game in the Source engine being Half-Life 2. He even adds that Source is particularly good at designing linear boxy hallways, which is also a very big staple of the office hallways in the Stanley Parable. After walking around the cafe for a while, you'll find a set of stairs that leads downward to a giant void filled with untextured blocks. This is obviously what the game's title was referring to, but I do like how this immediately contrasts Davey's statement regarding Coda's architecture. After walking a bit further, you'll transition into a prison full of gates. As the gates open and close, you're led into a prison cell where the doors close, and Coda intended this door to stay closed for an hour before opening. Not seeing the point in this, Davey releases you and skips the segment, going into how he and Coda argued about the idea of playability in games.
And I would always defend that, all this work goes into the game, why not make it playable and accessible? And so we just got into heated arguments over it, and there was one time that after one of these conversations, he went home, and a day or 2 later, he sent me a zip file entitled Playable Games that was full of hundreds of individual games, each of which was just an empty box that you walked around in and nothing else. Believe me, I played every single one of those just to find out if there was like a gag hidden somewhere. There wasn't.
If you haven't already noticed, almost every game so far is constantly modified by Davey because he doesn't think Coda's mechanics are making the games playable. Coda doesn't agree with Davey's view and chooses to keep these mechanics for his artistic vision. After walking a bit more through the complex, you run into another puzzle with the exact same solution from earlier. Also next to the puzzle door is the same 3 dots from the Ready Set Fish level from earlier, but with no new information to gain what it actually means, we have to move on. Davey says that while there's no clear reason why Coda is adding puzzle doors to each game over time, he says that it will share his interpretation shortly after the level. You then enter a room where you see 3 NPCs and a newly added chat feature to have a conversation with them. They'll ask you about how you got past the puzzle door, and you're given a few responses to choose from that either answer the question, dodge it, or even warn them from going to the other side. After answering, you go into another hallway where you're sent back to them again, but they don't remember the conversation you just had. Despite you saying that you've seen them before, they actually inform you this time to stay in the black space between the doors instead of solving it. They explain that while it may not seem ideal at first, the black space between the doors gets comfortable and peaceful over time. This is a very important statement of Coda's that we'll see developed over the next few games, but with the information in hand, you descend more into the level by a spiraling staircase until you reach a lamppost in the center of the courtyard. It's here Davey shares his interpretation of why Coda will start to fixate on this lamppost and place it at the end of each level.
I'll tell you what I think. I think that up to this point, he's been making really strange and abstract games with no clear purpose, and maybe you can only float around in that headspace for so long. Because now he wants something to hold on to. He wants a reference point. He wants the work to be leading to something. He wants a destination, which is what this lamppost is. It's a destination. We're going to see it in the work as well. His games are just going to become a lot more cohesive, a lot more fully developed, with more of a clear idea behind them. And as we go, that idea will get clearer and clearer and clearer.
The game's premise is that you're connected to the internet and other players have left notes during their playthroughs. You spawn into a concrete complex mixed with stone walkways, and you'll see various floating circles that contain players' notes. Davey mentions that you don't have to read all of them as apparently nothing extra will happen. After you read the first few notes, Davey explains that this is the first level that he saw Coda working on at the Sacramento Game Jam, and that it caught his eye because it seemed so different from what everybody else was doing. It's here that Davey introduced himself to Coda and adds in retrospect that he regrets being a little overbearing due to him wanting to get Coda's attention.
So right away I was like, I have to be friends with this person. In retrospect, I think I was probably a bit too pushy trying to get his attention. I was over-enthusiastic.
Davey reveals the game's twist, that all the notes are actually written by Coda.
To me, they convey a sense of loneliness. I see this person who's filled with thoughts and feelings and beliefs and has no way to express them except as scattered and unheard voices in a game that wasn't meant to be played.
It's here that we learn a bit more about Davey, someone who wants to connect with people in an easier and cleaner way in social situations. Basically, he argues that he could get to know people better through their work than to put in the time and effort with messy in-person conversations. He then explains that this is why Coda's games stand out to him.
I think this is why I always liked Coda's games so much, is because it felt like they let me have that connection. I felt as though he was inviting me personally into his world. And then I feel less lonely too.
Passing by more of the notes, you enter a big room with a large painting on the wall, then a spiral descending path with a lava pool below. Here you'll find the 3 dots being placed sneakily on the side of a pathway, and at this point, Davey takes the time to explain how each of these games have a specific meaning to Coda and how they correlate to specific parts of his life.
Each of these games represents an idea that was on Coda's mind at the time that he was making it. And the puzzle is a way of closing the door on a previous chapter of his life before moving on to the next one. In each of his games, after exploring a theme that, he might find difficult, Coda can then place this puzzle that he knows has a reliable solution, he understands exactly how it works, and so it gives him a simple mechanism for moving on.
And it's through this that Coda creates a space where he can stop and reflect what got him to this point in his life and move on from it. That's what the black spaces between the doors are for. The doors act as a way for him to move past what's been nagging at his mind for a long time. It allows Coda to truly think about the bigger picture. It's important to note that as you walk down the hallway to the door and solve the puzzle, several voices can be heard around you, which get louder and louder until they're drowned out by a room full of typewriters. Here you'll find the lamppost once again, and a lot of dialogue stemming from the typewriters, ranging from asking why it's difficult to speak, or commanding you to speak over and over again. The room typewriters might seem random or out of place, but I believe it might be an analogy for Davey or others pushing their views or interpretations on Coda's games to replace Coda's original intention. What I think is extremely relevant to this analogy and the overall game is the book The Death of the Author. Literary critic Roland Barthes wrote this book in 1967, with Barthes arguing that the author's intention should be dismissed for the reader's interpretations. I believe that this book and idea is a very big aspect of the beginner's guide, as we'll see later on.
It's gonna kinda just spin its own wheels for a few minutes. Hang with it.
You spawn into a furnished modern room with one side having prison bars and a pathway that leads to a well on the other side. In the room, there's a doorway and staircase that leads you to a long hallway, with you finding yourself in that very well that you couldn't reach. Davey states there's nothing particularly interesting about this level, but Coda gets hyper-focused to where he keeps revisiting it and changing various things. You're then taken to another version of the prison level where you're put into the room again, but with no furniture. Now you're given various choices of what furniture to place in certain areas, but you'll quickly find out that none of your choices matter and that there's predetermined choices. After you finish decorating the room, the walls pan out, revealing a vast array of furniture stacked just behind the room, similar to the Ready, Set, Fish level. Davey brushes this off and says that this is Coda just being weird for weirdness' sake. We're then transported to another version of the prison level, where we're given various instructions on how to escape the prison by interacting with the furniture in a certain order. It starts with things like moving the table, adjusting the photo frame, and turning the lamp on and off, and so on. It's in this room we see the three dots again before being transported back into the same prison room, but you can't escape because all the furniture is gone. Davey then speeds through a couple more variations that Coda created, wrestling with the execution of the prison level.
Here's a version where there are no bars, but you can't actually get to the well. And then a version where the inside of the prison is the outside and the outside is the inside. Let me just blink you real quick through a few more of these. I mean, he really unloaded on this prison idea. There's nearly a dozen of them. Personally, I think it's awful to watch this, to see a person basically unraveling through their work. And for what? Like, at what point do you just go, maybe there are game ideas other than this prison that I could be working on? But Coda doesn't have that voice telling you to stop, that particular mechanism of defense against yourself. Without it, you just spiral. And so he keeps going and going and going and going and going, and then he hits on something. And he likes it.
After this, you're transmitted to the final version of the prison level, where Davey says it's the best because the prison actually isn't involved at all. You walk past a few houses and hedges at nighttime, and walk up to a phone booth by the reoccurring lamppost. It's here where you talk with a past version of yourself, with your past self asking how to escape the prison and if life outside will be any better. Davey then explains that the reason Coda made this level was because he wanted to share with someone what was on his mind and get some good advice. He also points out the irony of this game is that it's still just Coda talking to himself, a pattern that all of his past games generally share. However, instead of being given the choice to talk about the instructions to escape, you're actually given dialogue options that encourage your past self to talk with you. These range from telling your past self to be sincere, to tell you how you actually feel, or just simply talk. The next level has you spawn into a snowy landscape with a little house perched on the hill above you. Davey immediately makes a connection that the way this level is designed is directly correlated to the puzzle doors. The house and the door represent the two sides of the puzzle, with a dark space in between. After walking in, you'll find an NPC asking for your help to clean up the house by doing various chores, such as organizing the bookshelf or rearranging the couch pillows. A few things I want to note here is that this is one of Coda's more unique levels if you look around at the level design and even the dialogue he wrote. This game's atmosphere is a lot cozier and more comforting than his past work, with the nice song VA accompanying you while you act as a caretaker. Davey even comments that after all of the past prison games from Coda, this one stands out as a palate cleanser. He draws an analogy to it feeling like a moment after a difficult situation where you just need to take a step back, sit down, and relax. This is also one of the few games that Coda personally asked Davey to check out, with him adding that Coda made this game in a period of his life where he was noticeably happier.
I know that Coda really liked this game. Of all of his work, actually, this was the only one that he called me up to ask me to come over and look at it. This was during a period of a few months where he was, like, grossly happy. all the time, just walked around with a constant smile on his face.
As you clean, there's some heartfelt dialogue given by the NPC, such as, all the little details matter, and no need to be perfect, we're all human. However, after doing a few more rounds of chores, the NPC talks about her experiences with cleaning houses, and how the most memorable experience comes from the houses that are the hardest to clean. The NPC goes on to say that one's house is a lot like one's soul. It's something to take care of consistently, even though it can be easy to forget about from time to time. Regardless of the past levels and their respective themes, this level stood out to me as a comforting game where you can take a moment to reflect and remember that it's important to take time to take care of yourself. This level alongside the prison level is why I knew I had to make a video on this game. This is when I realized that the beginner's guide was really dealing with the topic of mental health and not just game development. Suddenly, the game glitches out and the NPC and chores disappear along with the windows. With the level apparently ending, Davey pushes you forward into the next game by having you walk up the hill towards the puzzle doors. But this time, there's no puzzle door to get through, as the level itself was a representation of you solving the puzzle. Davey adds that it's crucial you don't stay in the dark space for too long.
Again, you can't stay in the dark space for too long. You just can't. You have to keep moving. It's how you stay alive.
Instead of it acting as a moment of active reflection, it could symbolize being stuck in a depressive or mental cycle, lingering on trauma or past bad experiences. It could get to the point that if you consistently stay in that headspace, you might begin to feel peaceful and comfortable, where you would feel guilty for actually being happy. This idea would directly correlate to what the NPCs were saying in the Descent level. Before Davey moves us to the next level, he seems to question his previous interpretation of what the puzzle doors meant. Is it intended to symbolize that sooner or later you have to move on? It starts with you in a university classroom with a teacher who's confident that he can effortlessly make people perfect like he is. The teacher's lecture is focused on comparison and jealousy to the extreme end, where you start feeling disgusted, useless, or selfish about yourself. Throughout the lecture, the teacher keeps pointing out how easy it is to become perfect, and the game's perspective shifts halfway through to the teacher's perspective. Immediately, you notice the black hole right outside the classroom next to the iconic lamppost. As outlandish as the black hole is, I think the point is to convey how the teacher is putting up a strong facade. In reality, he's not as perfect as you thought he was, and has as many flaws and fears as everyone else has. I do want to note that the teacher's dialogue choices have different colors, yellow being the perfect ideal response, and gray being the true but vulnerable response. Davey even makes a note about the idea of the game and how he's been thinking about it a lot ever since.
To assume that some other person is perfect and totally fulfilled in every way, and completely miss all of the little flaws that make them painfully human. I think about this game a lot these days.
Spawning into a backstage area, Davey tells you that it took Coda 4 months of development to make this game after the lecture level. Davey adds that he remembers feeling puzzled why it took Coda that long to make this game, as there's not anything groundbreaking about it. After walking out onto the stage, the lights turn on and blind you for a few seconds before Coda instructs you to go to a nearby wall and have a chat with a nearby woman. The music really adds to the awkwardness of the setting by the use of multiple instruments, creating a slightly off-tune melody. Despite any of the dialogue choices you choose to hopefully impress the photographer, Coda will be angry at how you handle the conversation. Something as simple as saying hello or being a bit more honest by saying you're nervous will make Coda berate you. He says that you're not acting confident like he was and not acting like a normal person would. Thinking that it's just a problem with the setting, Coda decides to add bumpable cones that simulate other people nearby. I like how the props are just cones, but the pluck string whenever you bounce off one and how suddenly they appear on stage just adds to the anxiety of the situation. Coda gives you one more chance to not mess up the conversation, but whatever you say won't satisfy him. He claims that any opportunity to make the conversation that personal that quickly is weird and will freak her out. Instead, he lifts up the curtains behind you and tells you to walk back into the endless hallway. Once again, we see the lamppost back here as we walk away from the stage, with Coda rejoicing and exclaiming that it works when prison bars begin to drop in front of you. In case you couldn't tell, this entire level is a reenactment of an experience Coda had when struggling with social anxiety. From the NPC cones pushing you away whenever you get too close, to all the acceptable responses that anyone would give, it's all coming from a perspective of a person who doesn't want to ruin their first impression and feels socially inept. And if interaction goes poorly, one thing you might find yourself doing is to withdraw or isolate yourself. From Coda's perspective, what's the point in trying if each time you keep messing up with no visible improvement and no new connections? That's why I think Coda giving the player instructions and then not exactly acting it out out perfectly symbolizes the struggle of social anxiety. You might think or feel one way, but when it comes to acting on that instinct in a social setting, it's easy to lose that momentum. Davey even comments on all of this at the end of the level.
The game ends with this eerie premonition of what's going to happen next in Coda's life. The solution to social anxiety, to fears of having to perform and having to chase success, the answer for Coda is to withdraw, to hide himself away. Which is what leads to scenarios like the stairs that slowed you down several games ago, where it just becomes harder and harder to access Coda's inner landscape because he keeps retreating. He just keeps backing away from possible connections to anyone other than himself. And to be honest, I didn't consider it very healthy when I first played this game. You know, it looked to me like he was trying to justify the idea of just disconnecting yourself from the world. And that wasn't what I wanted for him or for his games. Because I feel like a lot of his games are inviting me to connect with this person, to bring him closer.
Back to the game, Davey then clarifies that it wasn't until 5 months later, in June 2010, that Coda made the next level titled Mobius Trip. Here, Coda instructs that the player should close their eyes to have the intended game experience. If you're like me and didn't close your eyes to see what actually happens, you'll realize that you're in a Star Trek type ship headed for a floating puzzle door that you're about to crash into. You'll soon realize that neither any of the responses you choose, nor the NPCs you talk to, change the outcome of a crash in the ship. However, if you look above, you'll see a glass bridge where an NPC labeled Truth is standing next to a lamppost. The NPC explains that the only way to stop the crash is to say something honest. If you choose any of the other responses that talk about how creative work is always fun or that it's easy, the ship won't stop. The only response that makes any feasible progress is to say, I can't keep making these, which will be followed by more responses that dive into more of Coda's thoughts, how he's out of ideas, how he thought it was going to be easy, or how he even feels alone. Davey even makes the point of how he was wondering if Coda maybe needed his help in some way, as a lot of the games that Coda made at that point were indicating that he was burnt out or feeling alone. Davey also comments how the next few games would become a lot more desperate, with the next game taking Coda 6 months to make. In the next level, you spawn into a white void filled with floating islands as a disembodied voice comments on how it's been a long time since anyone's visited. If the other games didn't seem distressing or out of place, this next level ramps it up a ton. The music is already noticeably more harsh during this level. It sounds like the track is forcefully being rewinded and contorted, along with the singing becoming more distorted. Your choice of dialogue is very limited, and all the responses being related to how you feel empty of ideas or drained of any energy to find meaning in your work. The only way to progress in this level is to wait to respond to the voice's questions. The player then goes about how there's a machine that protected you from feeling this way, and the voice makes a deal to help you find the machine in return for a puzzle solution. Davey begins to talk about how he felt really bad for Coda at this time, as from an outside perspective, it seems like Coda dug himself into a hole that he couldn't really climb out of.
Here's a friend whose work is exhibiting signs of struggle, frustration, anxiety, depression even. And yet still, he keeps making games. He keeps throwing himself into the grinder even when he clearly doesn't have the energy for it anymore.
Walking across the bridge, you get to the puzzle door.
Because from my perspective at the time and just what I knew of him, this was a result of how isolated he was. He was in his own little bubble, just sitting at his computer all day, not really showing these games to anyone, not releasing them onto the internet, and so he didn't have anyone outside of himself to connect with. He had no outlet to ground himself on.
Which after you tell the disembodied voice how to solve it and get to the other side, you realize that there's no machine. Instead, there are walls with various bits of dialogue options from Coda's past level.
You can't talk yourself out of loneliness. It doesn't work that way. You can't be the one writing both the questions and the answers. Then there's no movement. Then there's no circulation. If all of your anxieties are being channeled into your work, then if the work ever fails, you have no backup and you're just going to crash.
Honestly, Davey makes a really good point here about how loneliness is something you can't just get out of easily. It takes active effort to pull yourself not only out of that mental state, but that situation of feeling like you have no one. You have to branch out and try to make connections, otherwise your mental state influences how you think and act. So if you put all of your energy into your work to try and process those feelings, it's going to come back at you amplified since there's no one to bounce off of except yourself. If you then listen closely, you'll notice that there's an unknown voice of a woman crying in the background, really increasing the already sickening atmosphere in this level. The voice asks you to promise to trust it and list only the good aspects of a creative work. Here, Davey starts explaining how it tore him apart to see Coda spiral this far from who Davey thought was a joyful and creative person.
Seeing this game at the time that he made it, it looked really unhealthy to me. I was watching him do this to himself, and I hated it. I hated seeing him so trapped. It's like, video games are not worth this amount of suffering. This is someone I really cared about, and I used to get so much joy out of seeing him create. For him to suddenly become angry and frustrated like this, it was the worst thing for me.
Davey goes on to say that he just felt really bad for Coda and more than anything wanted to help Coda get better, if not at least for Coda to stop feeling this way. After each response, the walls crack open and expand, being pushed back further and further until you see the lamppost again, but next to the prison room from earlier. This time though, there's a woman we haven't seen before inside that's the source of the crying from earlier. I think this is one of the most brutal levels to experience in the game, as it really doesn't shy away from how ugly putting your entire being into your work is. It sucks everything out of you until there's nothing left, and as uncomfortable and awful as this level is to play through, it communicates it perfectly. This next level was created 7 months later in May 2011 and is titled The Machine. This game has you standing outside of the familiar puzzle door with the guard standing near it, and he explains that they've captured the machine and that it's ready for interrogation. I want to point out that this is the only time the NPCs refer to you as ma'am, which will play into a game theory I have later on. Walking past the door towards the interrogation room, you'll see a crowd of reporters and journalists bombarding you with questions and wanting answers. As the doors close behind you, you encounter the machine face to face as it loudly groans.
And of course, it's the machine.
Communicating that it's either too broken to work or is actively choosing not to. Right off the bat, I want to connect the dots that this machine is the same one talked about in the Islands level. This same machine represents Coda's creative mind, and this interrogation actually represents him dealing with creative burnout. Mentioned in Islands, the machine was meant to protect Coda from feeling lonely, empty, and having no energy to give to his projects. If you notice the machine's appearance, you'll realize that it has the same 3 dots we've seen throughout most of the levels. Those 3 dots we've seen consistently are meant to act as a calling card from Coda. They're not some random texture, but are rather how he leaves his mark, and by extension, are meant to literally represent him. Since the dialogue choices immediately choose to blame the machine for causing people to suffer, it's clear that Coda is mad at himself for hyperfixating on these feelings. You have to keep in mind that the majority, if not all of these games that Coda has made, are essentially him talking with himself. It shows that he was maybe using creative projects as a way to escape these thoughts, and now that he can't find the energy to create anymore, he's left to reflect and face his feelings head on. This is apparent with dialogue like, "I've been so alone, and it was only because of your creations that any of us could make it through every day." After the interrogation, you walk out to talk with the press, where you announce the bad news that the machine will not apologize. Through more dialogue, you also say that you will find a way to live without games, choosing to say that you'll either destroy the machine or destroy everything that it's created. You then proceed to go back to previous levels that you've walked through and are given a gun to literally break apart Coda's games.
So now the work is becoming self-destructive. And I'll tell you, at the time that I first played this game, shortly after he made it, here's what I'm thinking to myself. I'm thinking that Coda's stuck in his own head, and that it's having a very negative effect on him, and that all he needs to do is just start showing his work to people, to get some actual feedback on his games. It might get him out of isolation. And so, as I'm thinking this, I realize that I could be the one to initiate it. Because it would never occur to Coda to start actively soliciting feedback, so what if I did it for him? If he could see the difference it would make to have more actual conversations with other human beings, would that bring him out of his mental spiral? Would it give him confidence in himself? Would it bring meaning back into his work? So I started showing Coda's work to people. I took this one, and the Islands, which you just played, the theater, the notes, the house cleaning game, and some of the prison escape games. I brought them to people that I knew and trusted. I asked their opinions. And the great part is that they really loved his games. You know, the point of it all was just to give him some external reference point, but they genuinely loved his work.
It's here we learn through Davey's monologue how the beginner's guide came to fruition. Davey hoped that by releasing Coda's games and sending in players' feedback, it would snap Coda out of this mental spiral and state of isolation to get liking game development again. All these levels of Codas that you've walked through are games that Davey gave people access to, with him adding that they really loved the games and that there was nothing that Coda should be afraid of. After all, the point of making the beginner's guide was to give Coda new ideas and feedback to be inspired by for improving his games. But Davey's actions here are leaving out a huge problem: the fact that he did all of this without Coda's permission. Davey never talked with Coda Coda about this and assumed that he would never want feedback. This statement hints at a consistent theme we've seen throughout the game of Davey projecting his own life onto Coda and his art. While Davey had good intentions to help a close friend, he was the one to initiate all of this, allowing people a door wide open into a part of Coda's personal life. Davey releasing this game is the completely wrong move, and we'll see more of this as the game is nearing its end. After falling through the puzzle door in a black void, you spawn in front of the machine by the very familiar lamppost and are given a gun to shoot it.
Can you see why I felt like this was the right thing to do? Because it's the thing that I always feel like I need, to be told that my work is good, that I am good. When someone really connects with a thing that I've made, when they see themselves purely in my work, there's nothing that feels better. And I got to give that very same feeling to my friend. I did something, I really felt like I'd done something good, like I was a good person. I felt like there was a friend who was in trouble and was unhappy and maybe didn't like themselves, and I could fix it. If I could give him this gift, maybe I could fix the problem. When they told me how much they enjoyed his games, it was the best feeling. It was the absolute best feeling. It made me feel so happy, so beautifully, beautifully happy.
This is where we see the big issue behind Davey trying to help Coda. Initially, Davey had good intentions to help a friend who he thought was in trouble. We now realize that the motivation stemmed more out of him wanting to feel like a good person. This idea that if Davey was the one to put Coda back on track, he would be a savior in a sense that he fixed all of Coda's issues. But by doing so, he was indirectly given the praise meant for Coda's work when he shared it with others, feeding into Davey's need for validation. After Davey shares all of Coda's games without permission, Coda stops making these games for a while until June 2011, when Davey gets an email from Coda that contains a link to a private game called The Tower. When you spawn in, you start off in a fairly normal room, but when you walk out, you enter a brutalist-style complex. There seems to be no ceiling as the walls seem to go up infinitely, with spotlights and orange gates being the only things contrasting with the level's darkness. Davey even comments on how this level feels especially cold and intimidating. It feels like Coda is trying to distance himself from the world. As you walk around, you'll hear voices eerily speaking in the distance, and if you listen closely enough, you'll hear a faint alarm, which is the same alarm that can be heard all the way back in the Whisper Machine level. After walking through a few dark hallways, you're onto a wide area surrounded by a dark void with several stairs leading to various places just out of reach. Davey tells you that there's an invisible maze in an empty space in front of you, and that whenever you touch the walls, you die. When you die, the screen will flash red, and you'll be sent to the start of the maze again. Davey allows you to modify the game to skip over the maze with an added bridge. He does this as he feels the maze seems to deter the player from even playing the game, with how impossible it seems to solve. Davey goes on about how this isn't the first time Coda's games needed modifications, with him actually revealing that the house game from earlier was meant to loop.
And to be fair, it's not like this is the first game that's needed some modification to be playable. Like the house cleaning game. You know, that one used to actually loop the cleaning chores and you just cleaned a house forever. I had to cut it off so that you could exit the house and the game would actually end. But that game had an idea that it was actually trying to communicate. What's the deeper idea behind the invisible maze?
Again, this is where we see a very big problem with Davey's modifications, as usually they would skip over a part that Coda intended to be played. But here it's even worse because Davey modified the house level to completely skew the main point, to prioritize his interpretation first. Time and time again, Davey feels the need to find his deeper meaning in Coda's games that might not exist. And we see this even in the tower level, where he sees no deeper idea being conveyed by the invisible maze. After walking up some stairs, you come across a code guessing puzzle that involves a specific 6-digit combination. Davey sees no way to accurately guess this, or sees no clue left by Coda to solve it, so he gives you the access to the solution. While you enter in the numbers, Davey says that he feels the tower level is everything against what Coda would develop in his games. Puzzles that waste time, and level design that doesn't encourage any thinking or interaction. With this, you can solve the puzzle, and a staircase will connect you to the next segment. You will then walk until you find a hole which you can fall down into, to find a room with a door and no way to open it. Davey explains that Coda purposely coded the door to not be open from your side, meaning that you'll have to actively modify the game to get in. And Davey takes this moment to reflect and explain how it feels scary that Coda was so willing to cut himself off from the world, and he felt sad that there was no way to help fix Coda's problem and that it made him feel like a failure.
The idea of Coda cutting himself off entirely, just saying, you know, that's it, that's the end of the conversation, not giving me any way to fix the problem. I feel like a failure, I guess, when I can't fix the problem.
Davey, in his goal to be friends with Coda and understand him through his work, ended up in him completely missing who Coda really was. By trying to find some deeper meaning in Coda's games, he ended up creating and projecting his own version of who Coda was. And the thing is, Davey did try to also ask Coda what his own games meant to him, like with what the 3 dots symbolized. The reality is that Coda was simply making games out of a personal enjoyment and didn't care if it had a deeper meaning or purpose. If we look past Davy's view of Coda, we see that Coda liked to create whatever games came to mind. Despite however unplayable or meaningless Coda's games might be, it's the fact that they were purely his creations, and that's what made them special. When Davy asked for Coda to give a clear, specific meaning to his games, it wasn't because Coda was being distant, but rather that he didn't feel the need to have his work analyzed and interpreted. The games meant something to him for only him to enjoy, but also were games that people could play and experience. And it's through all of this that we learn why Davy strongly wanted to be friends with Coda. He felt the need to have Coda's work be his own because Davy wanted to be someone else. He wanted to be like Coda. When Coda separated himself from Davy, Davy then was only left with himself and left to reflect on how he failed not only to be a friend to Coda, but also for Davy to be comfortable with himself. The solutions comment is actually interesting because if you go back to earlier in the tower level, those puzzles can actually be solved legitimately. And if you look at the Invisible Maze puzzle, the only other level that contains a maze would be from the Whisper Machine level. Davy even viewed that maze as pointless, but it had a purpose to be there. With the code puzzle, you can actually find the solution in one of the player messages left in the notes level. The message says, Devil, Tower, Star, which has several meanings alongside being the solution. With tarot cards, those cards end up being the 15th, 16th, and 17th cards in the deck, which is the puzzle solution. On top of that, the numbers translate to the amount of time it took Coda between games before the tower level, like one game in 5 months, the next in 6 months, and finally the last in 7 months. Davy was so focused on looking past the game's intended experience for a deeper meaning that he missed who Coda was and, in turn, missed the solutions to get past the tower level. The final puzzle with the locked door cannot be solved, as it's meant to be a final test to Davy to see if he'll modify Coda's games one last time and be faced with the hard truth. After this huge revelation about Davy and Coda, you'll walk up a few more stairs until you get to a room that resembles an art gallery. This upcoming part I feel like is really crucial to understanding the context of the entire game, so I'm just gonna let this part play in full without my commentary.
I'm the reason that you stopped making games, aren't I? It's because of what I did. I poisoned it for you. I don't think I ever told you this, but when I took your work and I was showing it to people, it actually felt... it felt as though I were responsible for something important and valuable. And the people who played them, they treated me like I was important. They really listened and cared about what I had to say. Even though I was showing your work, I felt good about myself. Finally. For a moment, while I had that, I liked myself. And then you stopped, and I didn't have anything left to show people. I just had to be with myself. And as soon as that happened, there was no feeling at all. Nothing. Less than nothing. What does that mean? I'm afraid that I did something really stupid because I don't like myself.
Immediately, we see that Davy, the person who wanted to encourage Coda to make more games, was the one to diminish Coda's motivation to create. In his goal to give Coda feedback and attention, Davy violated Coda's personal boundaries to do so, alongside using Coda's work to make it all about himself. We even see this idea through the lampposts. The lampposts that help build a cohesive story were actually placed by Davy. From the very beginning, Davy has lied to us about Coda and the purpose of his games in order to create a false narrative that would put him in the spotlight instead of Coda. Throughout the game, we learned a little bit about Davy and how he was inspired by Coda and his creativity, only now to realize that this inspiration stemmed more from a place of self-doubt and self-loathing. Davy wasn't happy with himself, and when he met Coda, he found a person who he wanted to be like. Davy analyzed Coda's games and released them to others in hopes that he would have a glimpse of what it would be like to be someone else. All of this is driven by Davy's need for validation, and when he got praise meant for Coda, it made him feel like somebody who had value and importance. It's this moment that Davy finally liked himself for once, and that praise and validation hooked him like a drug until those feelings stopped when he had nothing left to show of Coda's work. Coda wasn't making these games for Davy, but Davy was projecting himself so much onto Coda that his games basically became Davy's projects. From Coda's view, Davy infected him like a virus, where Coda started to become a different person and put solutions into his game. A quote placed by Coda even states how Davy's desperation for validation was rubbing off onto him, reading, "When I'm around you, I feel physically ill." This is where a big distinction between Davy and Coda lies. Coda views things like burnout and writer's block as a part of the process and not as a sign of depression, with Coda pointing out that Davy having this view reveals more about Davy's suppressed insecurities. What's also interesting is that despite all of the terrible things Davy did, Coda still wishes Davy the best and hopes that he'll find peace in the midst of his fears and problematic tendencies. The quote here is directly referencing the very beginning of the game, where it says the beginner's guide is about someone dealing with something they don't understand. Now though, we have the context to understand it's referencing Davy's battle with self-hatred, validation, and depression, with the final message saying, "When you finally see what I'm talking about, don't say anything." It's meant to remind Davy on his journey of self-improvement, to finally respect the art's integrity, to lean towards intrinsic motivation, and the newfound ability to accept himself. The final level starts with you being spawned into an empty train station, with a skylight showing a clear blue sky. A really peaceful scene in contrast to all the darker, heavier levels you've just experienced. It's a nice reminder of where you've come from and how far you've gone. Walking into the boarding station, you can board a train and walk through the train cars as Davy compares his insatiable need for validation to a disease.
More love, more praise, more people telling me that I'm good. Always more, more, more. It's like a disease. Stepping
off the train, you're teleported in front of a house where Davy begins to reminisce about how if he somehow better knew about Coda and his interests with weird games, he wouldn't have been as quick to think of Coda as a struggling, depressed person. Walking into the house, you can enter a big empty room with a staircase that leads you into several hallways and rooms, with each room and the next progressively filling with more scattered sand.
Even now, the disease is telling me to stop. Don't show people what a shitty person you are. They'll hate you.
After entering a dark room, you're transported to a narrow but well-lit cavern. It's here that Davy reflects more on his dependence on validation and how he feels like he can't change for the better at this point.
If I knew that my life depended on finding something to be driven by other than validation, what would that even be? It's strange, but the thought of not being driven by external validation is unthinkable. Like, I actually cannot conceive of what that would be like.
Walking past the stone pillars, you'll encounter a zigzag path that leads out of the caves, and Davy explains that he needs to go, feeling like he has a lot of work to do in order to improve himself and his life.
I'm sorry, because I know that I said that I would be here and I would walk you through this, but I'm starting to feel like I have a lot of work to do. I have a lot that I need to make up for.
With this being a narration game, I do want to pause here and highlight how this directly breaks a fundamental element of storytelling: the presence and trust of a reliable narrator. From the get-go, Davy was an unreliable narrator in multiple ways, like tampering with Coda's work or lying to you about the lampost's origin. All of this to the point of ruining his relationship with Coda. The entire game is built on broken promises made by a broken person. But even in this bleak reality, there's still hope for Davy to work his way out of this pit he's dug himself into. Walking out of the caves, you enter a desert-like biome with stone arches scattered around. You'll find a square hole that you can jump down into, which leads you into an elevator shaft. Walking down that hallway, you'll find yourself back in the train station from earlier, with a couple of staircases and hallways leading you to a whisper machine from the beginning of the game. Knowing what you need to do, you step into it and begin to levitate into the skybox, seeing a maze that expands across the horizon. Now, you're probably wondering what the beginner's guide is actually about after the huge tonal shift in the final levels. This is where we're going to take a look at some of the game theories and even analyze what I think the true story is about. For this section, I was debating which theories to cover, as there's a multitude of interpretations, but I'm going to skim over two of the more popular theories and then focus on what I believe truly reveals who Coda and Davy really are. This theory is the most obvious and expected one. that the story Davey tells is real, with Coda being an old friend, possibly William Pugh or R, that split off after he had a falling out with Davey. This is due to Davey pushing himself onto Coda, modifying the games to push a narrative, and then releasing Coda's games to the public without his permission. The entire game narrative is structured to tell the story and is framed in a way to make you believe it as you play through the game for the first time. However, there's not much else to add here, as the entire game's story already covers all of the theory's basics. By all means, it's a good theory, since it plays into the game's theme of when people read too much in between the lines to find a deeper meaning when there isn't one. This theory is kind of hard to believe with later context, but there's still some stuff to give the theory some ground to stand on. If you look around at the different levels, people believe there's hints that Coda actually might be a woman, or maybe even Davey's ex-partner. Specifically in the Whisper and Island levels, you'll notice how the only voice we hear outside of Davey's is a female voice.
We could disrupt it by introducing a great enough heat signature. If your body could stop the beam.
With that same female voice and character appearing in the island level behind the prison. Since we know only Coda worked on these games, it's safe to assume that these voice lines could be attributed to Coda. On top of this, there's also various times where the game uses female pronouns to address Coda as the player, but that's up in the air. A really interesting theory, but it definitely has less evidence to support its claims, and it doesn't actually add much. Regarding the true story, I want to go out on a limb here and actually admit that I haven't been fully honest with you the whole time. I've let out a crucial detail that clears up a lot of the ambiguity and issues in the beginner's guide, and this makes me believe that it's actually the true story. The detail is that Coda doesn't exist. The reason I say this is because Davey himself confirms in an interview that Coda was never real.
I mean, this isn't the first time you've said publicly that the Coda character isn't actually a real person.
Yeah, no, this is by miles the most in-depth I've ever gone into it.
So then, if Coda isn't a real person, who's Coda meant to actually represent, and who is he based off of? To answer that, we're going to have to rewind all the way back to Davey's first game, The Stanley Parable. In 2011, Davey launched The Stanley Parable initially as a Half-Life 2 mod, not expecting it to get the success it did. After the game gained a decent amount of popularity in such a short time, he teamed up with William Pugh and spent the next 2 to 3 years working on a standalone version of The Stanley Parable. He even adds as a side note that William and him never actually met in person until after the game's release due to how much he worked on it. The standalone game releases in 2013, and it gets so popular that Davey suddenly climbs from being an ordinary guy to a famous game developer. He admits the immediate shift to feeling important left him not knowing how to handle all of the newfound fame and attention. In a lecture at Aalto University, Davey explains that one of the things he wanted most was to be interviewed and asked about his opinion. And while one of his main goals had been achieved, he didn't move on in life feeling fulfilled.
And I came away from it with no satisfaction whatsoever. And it felt awful, like I'd been lied to. Like this thing that I had really wanted to be interviewed and to be asked my opinions, that it had given me no comfort whatsoever.
Due to the game's popularity, this drove Davey to actively respond to many emails about interviews and people's reception towards the game. Davey adds that the number of emails that he read began to be too much to the point where that's the only thing he did.
I responded to every single email. I assembled paperwork and art assets for festivals that wanted to show the game. I got on calls with every person who asked to do an interview. I wrote long email responses to every person who sent me written interview questions. I sent out a dozen copies of the game for review every single day, hundreds of them in a few days or weeks or however long it was. This was my life. I didn't do other things. I pretty much just responded to emails.
After responding to so many emails, he gets to a point whenever someone was trying to connect with him over his work, he felt like he gave a part of himself back to those people. It's around this point where he begins to be conflicted with himself. He realizes that there's two sides to him that are driven by different motives. First, there's a creative side driven by intrinsic motivation, which wants to develop fun features and create experimental games to see where he can take them. In contrast, the other side is driven by extrinsic motivation, and this side wants his games to be popular and played by people who would praise him and appreciate his work.
While I know that I was never doing any of it just to get recognized, it's really hard to separate your creative work from your ego. No matter how much that you really believe it's just for you, just for your own personal pleasure, eventually you find yourself looking around and thinking, does anyone else like this? Do you guys think this is cool? I think this is cool. What do you think? What do you, and you want that. It's impossible not to have those thoughts, or it's impossible for me anyway. But you keep making stuff anyway because you love it. Like me, you just want people to recognize you personally and tell you that they like your work, and so therefore they like you. There's always something, or multiple things. Everyone has this, whether you know it or not. You are developing and refining this reason every single day and with every single thing that you create.
These two sides are represented by Coda and Davey. The beginner's guide is essentially a dive into Davey's mental state after the launch of Stanley Parable. Coda never existed, but instead was Davey's psyche before and up to the launch of the Stanley Parable. And Davey's psyche got significantly worse after the game's launch. He began to receive some hate mail for supposedly racist imagery in the Stanley Parable, but it began to snowball until all of his emails were about him being a terrible person. Trying to explain how it wasn't his intention, he did multiple interviews and responded to as many emails as he could until he had basically no energy left. Being completely drained by his motivation and recognition, he spiraled into depression due to his life being consumed by the amount of hate and anger directed his way.
I was shutting myself down in order to protect myself, in order to try to get myself away from the onslaught of opinion and feelings that I had allowed myself to be subjected to. It was a defense mechanism against myself. Of course, I wouldn't have put it that way at the time, but looking back, I realized that I was trying to protect myself from my own need to please everyone.
The defense mechanism Davey mentions is exactly what he referenced Coda not having in the prison level. Davey created this analogy of Coda focusing on the prison idea because he himself felt that way about his life. Shutting down and isolating himself was his way to protect himself, and while not healthy, it was enough to keep him from spiraling further. Despite this attention slowly causing him to withdraw and disconnect, Davey still pushed forward to stay in the spotlight as long as possible because to him, it seemed to fulfill that need. His situation elevated to such a bad level where Davey began to treat his best friend and roommate Robin very poorly. Partly because he felt so close to Robin, he found it easier to release his insecurities and anxieties. But Davey was in such a bad mindset that he was interpreting even the smallest interactions as personal attacks towards him. This eventually led to Robin splitting away from Davey.
He was and is one of the closest people in my life, which is perhaps why I unleashed my anxieties on him. And then that summer, almost a year ago, or a little under a year ago, he pulled me aside one day and sat me down and told me that when he was around me, when I was in the same room, that it made him feel physically ill. And that's when I realized, for the very first time, what a shitbag I was being.
This is the exact same quote found near the end of the beginner's guide, although now we know it's from his roommate, Robin. This became a major turning point for Davey because it made him take a step back and realize how downhill his life had become. Thankfully, he took this as an opportunity to climb out of that depressive spiral through friends, family, and therapy, with him being in a much better mental state than ever before. He did discover a central reason for his depression. He explains that he wanted to be loved in a way that he felt couldn't happen without his work.
A big part of why I was making games in the first place was to be loved in a way that I did not feel I could be loved without my work. And so I'm thinking, as I'm making Stanley Parable, I'm thinking to myself, when I put this out, people who already know me, sure, they'll see the work, and then they'll see me, and then they'll really know me. And then they'll get me because I put so much of myself in this game.
It was this idea that if people saw how much work and effort he put into his game, then he would have people outside his friends and family like and understand him for who he was as a person. It's through the development of the Stanley Parable where he allowed himself to push for the goal to the point of actively hurting himself. All of this sets up the context for the overall story to help explain how Coda is Davey and how Coda's 4 years in the beginner's guide lines up exactly with Davey's 4 years after the Stanley Parable. That's why I like to think of the beginner's guide as an unofficial sequel to the Stanley Parable. Davey creating experimental games and highlighting their unique progression isn't the game's setting by chance. It even lines up with Stanley making his own choices against the narrator, with Davey even seeing himself in Stanley, someone who was aimless and alone to the point he looked to other people for validation.
So again, why did I make Stanley Parable? It's because I was alone. I felt very, very alone. And it's not like I didn't have friends. I had great friends. And yet the burning thing on my mind was the story of this man who's completely, vastly alone. It wasn't enough just to have friends. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be liked for some much grander reason. I wanted to be told that I was great.
It got to the point where the game development sucked every bit of free time from him until he had no room left for self-care or mental health. He makes the point that he's not asking for people's pity, but to communicate what is at risk. The risk that people have who don't know why they're creating the projects they devote their life to. There are also going to be a few reasons why Davey created Coda and gave him that name. The term DS al Coda is used in music composition to direct the player to return to an earlier spot in the song. The last song in the game's soundtrack shares these terms and is followed by another song titled Turn Back, acting as a warning to not go down Davey's path. Even the game's logo uses the Coda symbol. That's why I think this game is so impressive. The story and all the details are so well crafted and purposely separated from Davey's life that a lot of people took this game at face value and thought that Coda was real. They thought Davey legitimately posted Coda's games without permission and was a terrible person. The beginner's guide portrays Davey's struggle with depression and his motivation for game development, with him hoping that it acts as a cautionary tale for those going down a similar path. People might look at Davey's games like the Stanley Parable or the beginner's guide and think they're overly meta and pretentious in their presentations. But if you take a moment to look past the initial bias and look at the context surrounding these games, I see a person who's very sincere and vulnerable about his struggle with creativity, validation, and depression, and communicates that through his games.
If I knew that my life depended on finding something to be driven by other than validation, what would that even be? we're going to look at the games made by a friend of mine named Coda. I want us to see past the games themselves. I want to get to know who this human being really is. It's a lamppost. He wants the work to be leading to something. He wants a destination. I see this person who's filled with thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, and has no way to express them except as scattered and unheard voices in a game that wasn't meant to be played. Here's a friend whose work is exhibiting signs of struggle, frustration, anxiety, depression even, and yet still he keeps making games. Video games are not worth this amount of suffering. Coda would often tell me that he didn't mind if people thought of him as cold or distant. He said that he knew that he was actually a vibrant and compassionate person. And so this is what Coda wants, is to be able to talk to someone. You can't talk yourself out of loneliness. It doesn't work that way. The solution to social anxiety, to fears of having to perform and having to chase success, the answer for Coda is to hide himself away. I think it's awful to watch this, to see a person basically unraveling through their work. I think about this game a lot these days. I'm glad he made this. I'm glad he found some peace. I had come to so many conclusions from looking at all of his work up to this point, and then suddenly none of them I had been trying to, though. That was the thing. For years I was trying to get to know him, to understand who he actually was and what he stood for. I don't know this person. I have no idea who this person is. I'm the reason that you stopped making games, aren't I? I really felt like I'd done something good, like I was a good person. Even though I was showing your work, they treated me like I was important. They really listened and cared about what I had to say. Because I know that I did an awful thing, and I'm doing it again right now. Like, I'm showing people your work, but I can't stop myself from doing it. Start making games again. Please help me. Please give me some of whatever it is that makes you complete. I want whatever that wholeness is that you just summoned out of nothing. You put in your work. You were complete in some way that I never was. And I want to know I want to know how to be a good person. I want to know how not to hate myself. Please. I'm sorry, because I know that I said that I would be here and I would walk you through this, but I have a lot that I need to make up for.
One last thing before I end the video, if you're interested in more of Davy's work, I highly recommend you check out his new game called Wanderstop. It's basically a cozy game where you get to do mundane tasks and get to listen to some amazing music done by C418. But honestly, if this game or any of Davy's other works inspire you and seems like you would enjoy it, please check them out and support him. It's just really inspiring to see a guy who struggled with making games, mental health, and even himself to eventually come out on top and keep doing the thing that he loves and progressively getting better at it. That's why I really appreciate the Beginner's Guide so much. It tackles the idea of mental health in such an interesting and sincere way, and I really hope it gets the recognition and appreciation it deserves. Even though this video probably won't reach a huge audience with my currently small channel, I still wanted to try and bring attention to this amazing game that I hope you'll play for yourself. As much as I yapped about the game and glazed it, it's a game that you have to experience for yourself. Regardless, if you made it to the end of the video, I cannot thank you enough for watching, and I hope to see you stick around.